Always think of that, Tom.
All right, we call this meeting of the Education Committee of the New York State Senate to order. I'm Senator Carl Marcelino, and I am the new chair of the Education Committee, so this is my first meeting of the committee as chair, so if I make a mistake, Senator Latimer here will hit me in the arm and remind me.
We'll just whisper nice thing.
Okay, he's a whisperer, so that works.
You have the right tie on, I will say that.
I've got the right. So we're all set for that. We have our agenda today is strictly the meeting with the Commissioner of the Education Department, Mary Ellen Elio. And I've had occasion to meet with her and speak with her on more than one occasion, and I find her to be a refreshing, open, direct individual who knows the subject matter and knows education, because from my understanding, you've held just about every job there is in the education field.
A lot of jobs.
So
I haven't held your jobs, though. Thank you.
Not a bargain either way.
That's right.
If we could, just to go around the room of the senators who are sitting at the table, who will be the only ones who could ask questions. We're going to limit questions to the senators at the table, because we have a conference to get to and a session to get to, and there's some business that we have to do. We have to be downstairs in a timely fashion. So I'm going to limit the questions to the senators. Ms. Celia will open up with a statement, and then we'll allow your questions and make them as succinct as possible. Can we start?
Senator Tony Avella.
You do.
Senator Sue Serino.
Senator Hugh Farley.
Betty Little from the North Country, Warren, Washington, Essex, Clinton, Hamilton, or not Hamilton, Franklin, Parks, and St. Lawrence County.
David Valesky, Syracuse area.
Senator Joe Dabo, Southern Queens.
Senator Jim Seward, Central New York, and based on the Cooperstown area.
George Latimer from Westchester. I have the eastern third of Westchester County.
And as I said before, I'm Senator Marcelino from the North Shore of Nassau and Suffolk County.
So, Senator Marcelino, thank you for letting me be here today, and I appreciate the opportunity to talk with all of you. I don't know who's going to whisper to me, because this is my first meeting as well, so we can move to anyone. If you feel like I need to move on, you can give me a little shove. I'd like to introduce myself to you. I have met some of you, I believe, and you may have been in meetings that I've had. But I am, as Senator Marcelino pointed out, a longtime educator. I started at Sweet Home in Western New York in 1970, and I ended up back in Western New York dealing with the issues of the State Ed Department and working both with the Senate and the Assembly about 6.5 months ago. And so I had a time in the southern states in Florida. I was there for 30 years, and I had, as Senator Marcelino pointed out, a number of different positions, ending with the superintendency in a very large district there. So I have had a lot of experience, and I come to New York at wanting to use that experience to really move forward with what I think we need to do. I was a social studies teacher for 19 years, and 17 of those years were here in Western New York at Sweet Home, a NYSET member and a strong supporter of teachers. So I believe that we have to move forward to make sure that every teacher is ready to do the very best job they can do in every classroom across the state of New York. So in my first 6 months, I have traveled the state of New York, approximately 20,000 miles, and visited in every place that I'm going with different stakeholder groups, including parents, school board members, administrators, but primarily the teachers, and talked about some of the big issues. And I don't think it's any surprise to you, Senator Marcelino and I were both on the governor's task force, and we have addressed a number of those issues and moved forward on them. So I'm going to jump into what I think are the big issues, and then hopefully your questions will be open it up a little bit more. At the top of the list, I heard that the APPR system, our evaluation of teachers, needed to be revised, and that in fact we needed to move in a very different direction. I am a strong supporter of accountability. I have been my entire career, and I work very closely with our teachers union in my previous district to develop a system where we did use teacher evaluation as a key to improvement. I think that needs to be our focus. We have a number of very talented teachers. We have people going into the field. They need support, and they need to have help in making sure that they are aware of what needs to occur across all of the classrooms. Last month, the department and the Board of Regents took the action to address the concerns regarding APPR, and we put in place a hold on the APPR system until 2019-2020. And during that time, we will be addressing a number of issues. Clearly, the assessments and how we can make sure that we turn around kind of perception that teachers have that they weren't involved, that we don't have quality assessments, and that in fact they become very much involved. You know, New York State is a place where for decades teachers have been involved in the development of the Regents exams, which are across the nation held up as quality assessments. And I think it's important for us to address those issues. Also, we did at SED a survey prior to the task force being put together, and that survey told us with a very high number of people responding that 71% basically of the people that responded supported high standards. But we need to look at those standards. They've been in place for 5 years. Our work is right now to review the standards with particularly the practitioners that are in our classrooms and in our schools across the state, with experts, and to look at the issues that they believe are necessary to make changes to the standards that have been approved in New York State. I think that for us to be ready to move forward and to support jobs that are in the 21st century that are unfilled in New York State, as they are in many places, we need to prepare our students well. And to do that, I think we need to focus on making sure the standards are high. Students do not have to go into a college or university and immediately take remediation courses. We need to get them prepared prior to them walking out of our schools. And we need to work closely with both SUNY and CUNY to make sure that that happens in partnership. But we also then need to make sure that students are prepared to do what they want to do in the next part of their life. And I have 2 children. They never walked to the same drummer. They always had different approaches to school, and both of them are very successful.
Yours must be the same as mine.
Well, and I think most people probably around the table. So in terms of high standards, I'm there. I think we have to do that. And in terms of assessments, I think we need to revise and review our assessments and get the teachers of New York State and the experts working with them to develop quality assessments that we all believe give feedback to teachers to improve and to help every student to get better in the classroom. So, so what's next? I think a number of things that were laid out in the Governor's Task Force are the positions and things that we've already started. The review of the standards is being done with the guidance of the regents, and we'll be working through that, including practitioners from across the state. A review and shift of the assessments. We have changed the company that does the assessments with the state. That was done in July, and we already have included many more teachers in the review right now for the assessments that will be coming out this spring. We're also changing the length of the assessments. That's another big thing that I heard in my listening tours, that parents and teachers believe that the assessments were too long, and we're shortening the assessments, and we're having teachers review each of the components of the assessments, particularly the passages that are included in the English language arts assessment to make sure that they see that they're a match to the standards that we have in place. And so, another thing that was a big agenda was parents and teachers and administrators said, we have some students that get very stressed when they're in a timed assessment, so we're going to open that up and allow any student that's productively working to continue working. If they want to work, they should be able to work. We really want to assess whether they can read, not whether they can be a speed reader. And as we move forward, I think the important point is we need to have options for assessment, and particularly with our students with disabilities, we need to expand that. I'm sure you're aware that the State Ed Department had requested on a number of occasions a waiver from the federal government on the requirements of assessments for students with disabilities, and it was denied. Now with the new federal law, we believe that that's opening up some, and we're very interested in New York becoming one of the leaders in the development of appropriate assessments for all students. And so those are some of the things that we have on our agenda. I think we need to continue to listen, be responsive not only to districts and teachers, but to parents across the state, and that's my goal.
Okay. Senator Lambert, would you introduce some of the members of your conference that just showed up?
Commissioner, we've been joined from the Democratic Conference by Senator Toby Stavisky of Queens, who is also the ranker on higher education, which falls within your responsibilities. Senator Neil Breslin from Albany County is with us, experienced member of our conference. We have also Jesse Hamilton, senator from Brooklyn, who's joined us. I think Joe's introduced already, Mr. Chairman.
And we have Senator Rasenhofer from the Buffalo region, hopefully
Home of
not
the
snowed in.
Panthers.
Ah, great.
Hopefully not snowed in yet.
Not yet.
Soon.
Don't say that.
Soon, I saw a hand. So, Senator Farley.
Commissioner, I was wondering what your feelings are in regard to consolidation of some of these smaller rural school districts and so forth. I know the governor's been interested in that, but I think it's something that your department should be addressing, and how it can bring about mergers and consolidation, if you think that's a good idea.
Well, in actual fact, there are a number of districts that are studying that now and looking at whether they're going to move forward with it. And clearly our departments can be helpful in having them see exactly what it can do in terms of efficiencies for them. And my experience is that we have done that in a number of different districts. But if you have a specific area that you feel we should work on, we'd be happy to do that.
I think it has to be made easier, you know, with the voting, with one school district voting it down and so forth. That ends it, and there's been such failures in these school districts that tried to merge because they couldn't get it done. And I think that some of that should be addressed, or at least recommended.
So I'll definitely look at that.
Senator.
Me?
Yeah.
Oh, thank you. Thank you very much for being here. I missed you at Lake Placid at the BOCES meeting.
Yes.
But everyone was very impressed. And I was impressed that you were there and listening to the superintendents as well. One of the things I think that has to be a concern as we go forward is with the 2009 cuts to schools. Teachers, a lot of teachers were laid off. We had it throughout my district. And I represent 48 different school districts in my Senate district. But, and then the Common Core and the evaluations and all of that. Plattsburgh, which I also represent, has seen a 47% drop in their education majors and people going into education. And I think that that's one of the things we need to be looking at going forward, and even making that degree more attractive and a little bit more general. I was an elementary education major at St. Rose and taught for a few years, but you know, in many ways that education major can be changed and added to, and, you know, enhanced to encourage people to come into it and try and not be so limiting.
So I think that's a very important agenda for us. You know, if you look at the projections for retirements over the next 5 to 8 years, it will create a serious issue with the number of teachers that we don't have going into the field. So we've got to really open up that pipeline so that more of our students leaving high school see that as an option and really a great career. I think there's a number of issues that we believe are really important. First of all, I think it's important for us to work together with our university system to make sure that the teachers that we get have the opportunities to be successful when they walk out. And we've strengthened the relationship between SUNY, CUNY, and the State Ed Department in my short period of time here. So we're very interested in that, and our budget has called for some for funding in particular areas to support those teacher ed programs that can be and have shown to be extremely successful. I think another thing that we have to do is stop beating up teachers.
Absolutely.
Right?
That's been
This has been a national kind of conversation that has done nothing but hurt teachers who are probably in the most important career certainly I believe in a democracy. And it just has to stop. And I think one of the things we can do in New York is to develop strong relationships in supporting teachers and programming to support teachers. And you brought up the issue of higher standards and the emphasis that needs to be placed on teachers as they move to become successful and to really support their students' outcomes. Our teachers need to have support. And the State Ed Department, I believe, needs to take a very critical leadership role in making that occur. We have budget requests that have been put in place, you'll see them, to support the agenda for staff development for our teachers. And our evaluation process should be one, as I pointed out earlier, of giving feedback to teachers on how they can get better. But until all those things occur, the trend that you're seeing in New York and at Plattsburgh and at other colleges and universities in our state is a national trend. And in fact, we pulled the data and we're probably in a better position than many other states because they have even fewer teachers in that pipeline. So this national conversation has to shift, and I hope with the new law passed out in Washington that it'll start to move that. Thank you.
Senator Latimer?
Commissioner, two questions, one macro, one micro. The macro question, what's your philosophy on how we deal with struggling schools? The issue's been put on the table about receivership and so forth. How do you view that issue?
Well, when you have a struggling school for multiple years, something has to give. Something has to change, and I believe that that State Ed's role should be to support those schools to get better. I think it's extremely important for us to know that this is a long process. It doesn't happen overnight. The people that have been working in those schools, for the most part, are working very hard to bring change, but sometimes you just have to change things very differently. And I think the receivership law that we currently have in place is a beginning to that. It is not necessarily the same model that has been successful in other states, and I think that we have to look at that carefully. But schools need to have an opportunity to change pretty drastically to support the students that are there.
A micro, and then I'm done. I just want to provide you another copy of the letter. Small issue, but I think important. It may affect more than just some of the districts I've seen. There are, as we understand it, discrepancies between the state general election law and the education law as relates to school board elections. Obviously, it doesn't apply to New York City, it doesn't apply to Big Five schools. Some of the school districts in my area have said that now that they have to use optical scan equipment, they often are getting it from the Board of Elections, and there are differences between how those two things can mesh. That letter, would you please look into it and have someone address it?
Sure.
I believe there's a basis for a departmental legislation to be drafted in which your department is recommending to us considerate changes in either the education law or the election law to make the things mesh. And I'll leave it at that for your review.
Great, thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Senator Dowell?
Commissioner, thank you very much for being here and for your efforts in work in education. Much of your educational career was in Florida. Did you see something in Florida that worked or might have been different that you could bring up here and possibly work through our educational system up here different than it was possibly in Florida, but might have worked in Florida?
Well, I think that there's a number of things, right? But I was 19 years, 17 years of those teaching years were here. And I always found that at the time that I was teaching in New York, that we had some great opportunities to help student by student. Kids aren't all the same. We have to figure out what the programming is and the intersections that can really support them. But I think one of the things that, and you'll see it in our budget, is the request that we put in for the career technical programs. And moving the career technical programs to provide, if students fulfill the requirements for the certification in that particular area. We've already opened up the optional pathways for graduation in the state, and I think that's an important thing to do. As I said earlier, students all kind of have an agenda for what they want to do when they leave high school, and I think we need to make sure that we get them ready for those jobs of the 21st century, which are going to require post-secondary work or strong certification availability in high school and into programs like our P-TECH program here in New York. So that strong career technical education is something that in the state that I was in was a very strong focus. And it helped, if you look at the development of businesses and who would come to a state, the workforce that's available is critical. And I think as we talk about developing in New York State, and the budget that was presented by the governor the other day specifically requires skilled workers, post-secondary certified, and I think it's critical for us to extend that and connect what we do with providing options in high school for students. So doing dual enrollment, advanced placement, international baccalaureate, and post-secondary connections for students. It helps students and families save a lot of money. It puts students in a much better position to complete college in a normal 4-year cycle, and they walk in with the perception, I can be successful at higher level coursework. I think there's a great connection there for our kids, and we've got to make sure that as we push the outcomes for students, that all is connected.
Mr. Chair, just a quick second question relating to the assessments that you mentioned, the changes that are forthcoming. Can we clarify the time frame for those changes? Would they be this year, these assessments?
So this year, the assessments will be shorter at every grade level, 3 through 8, ELA and mathematics. Teachers will be more involved in the questions, in that they're reviewing the questions and reviewing the passages that are associated particularly with ELA. And we are extending the time so that a student who's productively working will be able to continue working. And we believe that that will help many students who currently get stressed over that issue have opportunities to complete the assessments. We also have some changes as it relates to the reporting of what goes on at the end, after the students take the assessments, getting those reports back to our teachers in our schools in a timely way that will allow that data and the performance of students to be used in planning for the summer, as well as improvement in the classroom for that teacher the next year.
Thank you, Commissioner.
Senator
Thank you,
Stewart.
Mr. Chair.
Yeah, thank you, Commissioner, also for being here with us today for this discussion. I'm finding it very refreshing to hear your comments in terms of flexibility when it comes to student assessment, teacher evaluations, but at the same time, not backing away from accountability and where we need to be in terms of helping our students achieve more in the classroom, with higher standards. I think that's the right mix. I have a two-part question. And number one, have you had the opportunity to evaluate the new federal legislation, which, as I understand it, would provide us with additional flexibility in terms of what had been federal requirements in the past, and how you would see that impacting the direction that we will be going here in New York State? And secondly, Common Core. What you see in terms of the future of Common Core in New York State. Many of us met with a previous commissioner who was rather confrontational because of the poor, what I would consider to be the poor rollout of Common Core here in New York State. and which cause a lot of problems in so many of our districts without buy-in by teachers and parents and so on. That's my two-part question in terms of the federal impact of the federal legislation here in New York, and also the future of Common Core in our state.
Okay, so relative to the federal legislation, we're still going through it. It's an extensive bill, but I would agree that what we've seen so far clearly gives us some more flexibility related specifically to the issue of teacher evaluations. It also gives us flexibility in how we design curriculum, and I think we hope that our reporting to the federal government will be less demanding, so that we can focus on what we think needs to have support to change. So although we haven't done the full analysis, we'll be bringing that to the regions, I hope at the next meeting or in March. But we clearly are focused on making sure that where there is flexibility, we take advantage of that flexibility and put in place processes that will allow us to have less controls and put local control back in place in a way that's positive for the development of each of our districts across the state. Now, let me say this, while you're doing that, you still have to put a system in place for the assessments. They are still required, we know that. You also have to have the availability of a system that will do accountability for schools and districts with disaggregated data that specifically gives us feedback on how well all of our students are doing. And I think that's a very important component to have kept in the law, since it then lays out all the facts for our districts to know where they have to really target their energies and their goals for students. So we feel like this will give us a lot of flexibility. We were on the phone this morning with organizations that are supporting some of this openness in terms of flexibility with testing. We hope that New York will be one of those states that are identified to be able to use that flexibility and get some additional funding to develop. Exams and assessments are very expensive. The budget here in Florida, the budget here in New York is very different than the budgets in other large states. We spend much less on our assessments, but we put equal stress on them. And so we have to make sure that we get the right assessments put in place for all of our students, and that's one of our goals. So particularly for our students with disabilities, we want to make sure that the assessments that we have in place for them are reasonable and appropriate for them, but that they're challenged and that they have accountability in the districts in providing that for them. So for that question, that's where I think we're going, and it does provide flexibility within a constraint that we know is probably a good one. And the second part about Common Core, I pointed out we did a survey and had over 10,000 people respond to the survey, over 250,000 actual points of interest on specific standards. Of course, there's many standards in both ELA and mathematics. But what I would say is that we're going to look at all of the standards, use the feedback that we got, have committees of practitioners review the standards and make recommendations. We'll have, those recommendations will go to the regions, and there will be changes. We've had standards in the United States since 1647, okay? They should change. We shouldn't think that anything that gets put in is there forever and has to be the only thing that can be done. There are some benefits to having common standards, but everything doesn't have to be common. And I think it's very important for us to look at what is appropriate and get feedback from the people that are out in the classrooms implementing these standards every day to tell us what's working and what may be developmentally inappropriate, needs to be shifted, and isn't putting our students in the best place to be successful. So we're going to have a review of all the standards. I would anticipate there will be changes. We've seen that in the survey, and I think we need to listen to the people who are doing this every day.
As a quick follow-up, if I may, Mr. Chairman, I've been very, very impressed, Commissioner, with your traveling around the state, visiting schools and interacting with educators and others interested stakeholders. And with that thought in mind, last July I sent you a letter inviting you to come to a rural school in my district in central New York. We haven't worked out a date at all with your staff.
I've been in some in that area, but not, I don't think any
Right,
of yours.
so I would
but I'd
like to
love
pass along a
Sure.
copy of my letter from last July, and hopefully we will soon be able to come to an agreement to have you visit, because we would very much like to have you interact with some of the educators in my particular area.
Thank you. I'm on my way down to Binghamton after this meeting, and I have meetings set up for the whole day tomorrow with several different districts.
Right, we would be about halfway to Binghamton.
I've been to Cooperstown.
Okay, great, we'll set it up.
One of my favorite places.
Okay, well, we'd love to have you back.
Since I'm a baseball person.
Very good.
Senator Hamilton.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Welcome, Commissioner.
Thank you.
Pleasure to be here. Before the state senate, I was a school board president in Central Brooklyn.
Then we'll move on to somebody else.
Thank you. And we had the fifth best school in New York State. It was a Crown School for Law and Journalism, Public School 161. And you mentioned accountability. And what's happening now, I have a school, part of my district now, Brownsville,